They taught continuity. He lit a candle and made the whole class see something no one had ever seen. Lucas sat where no one looked. It was a quiet corner just before the third-floor landing at the University of Chicago's mathematics building. The walls there were faded gray, the kind of gray that remembered years. Dust danced in the morning light, slicing through the old stained glass window. The boy had made that spot his own, though he claimed nothing. He simply returned every Monday at 8:55 and waited. In his lap rested a cloth satchel, frayed at the seams, wax-stained. In his hand, a candle, freshly made. That day it was lavender. The scent floated gently into the stairwell, ignored by most who rushed past in search of deadlines or coffee. But it lingered. Lucas didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. Down the hall, Room 3B held Professor Bellamy's advanced course on real analysis, the kind of class that only the brave, or desperate, dared to take. That morning the discussion was on continuity, but not the simple kind. This was deep water now. Functions that misbehaved, points that refused to behave, definitions that unraveled if held too tightly. Professor Bellamy was old, but not brittle. His hands still moved like a conductor's when he drew graphs on the board. Elegant arcs, sudden jumps, whispered asymptotes. His voice was patient but exact. If a function has a limit at a point from both sides, he said, tapping the chalk, but the function value differs, what have we lost? Students scribbled. Evelyn, the department's brightest graduate student, sat upright in the second row, jaw tight. She had read this chapter a dozen times, and yet... "We've lost continuity," someone muttered. Bellamy turned, slow. "Have we?" he asked. A silence grew, and in it, something unexpected happened. From just outside the half-open door, a voice so soft it could have been a thought said, "It hasn't gone out. It's just waiting for the right wind." The class looked up. A few glanced around, confused. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. Professor Bellamy walked to the door and opened it fully. There stood Lucas, candle in hand, eyes round and still. He looked not afraid nor eager, just present. "What did you say?" Bellamy asked. Lucas stepped 1 foot forward. "If a candle goes out," he said, "sometimes it's just the wind. If the wind changes, it lights again. Maybe the flame wasn't the problem. Maybe we were." The students exchanged uncertain glances, but Bellamy smiled. "What's your name?" "Lucas." "You're not enrolled?" "No." "Why are you here?" Lucas looked down at the candle, then back up. "I like the way the questions feel." That night, Bellamy didn't sleep. He reread his own lecture notes and felt them hollow. Not wrong, just unlived. A child had spoken a metaphor, yes, but it wasn't nonsense. It was a different kind of rigor, one that mathematics once knew and forgot. The next Monday, Lucas returned, this time with a cinnamon candle. He sat on the stairway as always, but the door was already open. "Come in," Bellamy said, without even turning around. Lucas stood still for a moment. The class was full. Some stared. Some scoffed. Evelyn looked away, visibly annoyed. Lucas chose a corner near the window and sat, candle between his palms. That day's topic, functions that converge, but not where they're expected to. Limits that arrive just outside reach. Evelyn raised her hand. "But if the behavior doesn't stabilize at the point, isn't the entire function suspect?" Lucas's voice, small but clear, echoed from the window seat. "Maybe it's like walking across a bridge in fog," he said. "You don't see the end, but your feet feel where the wood stops bending." Bellamy stopped mid-sentence. "Please write that down," he said, not to Lucas, but to the class. At first, the students resisted him. Lucas didn't take notes. He didn't use terms like epsilon delta. He watched the chalk move and sometimes whispered to himself. But one by one, the students began to notice. Lucas saw patterns not as rules, but as moods. He described the slope of a tangent not as instantaneous rate of change, but the direction a shadow would fall if the candle leaned. Evelyn grew furious. "This isn't math," she snapped one morning. "It's poetry." Lucas didn't answer, but Bellamy did. "Yes," he said. "Yes, it is." One afternoon, Evelyn dropped her notebook. Lucas picked it up and handed it to her without a word. She looked at his hands. The fingers were stained with old wax, thin burns, familiar scars. There was something delicate in the way he moved, as if he were always handling something warm, breakable. "Do you even know what a function is?" she asked him. Lucas tilted his head. "It's something that listens." That winter, Bellamy invited Lucas to his office. "I've taught for 43 years, the professor said, "but I think I've only just begun learning." Lucas didn't speak. He was watching the candle on Bellamy's desk. It had burned unevenly, a lopsided pool forming on one side. "Do you see something?" Bellamy asked. Lucas pointed to the candle base. "It's not wrong," he said. "Just leaning." Word of the boy spread. Students from other classes came to glimpse the child with wax-stained fingers. Some mocked him. Some left offerings of unused notebooks near the stairwell. Still, Lucas came and went, silent, observing. His mother never asked where he'd been. She only smiled when he came home smelling like chalk and rain. One Monday, as the class was packing up, Evelyn remained seated. Her hands trembled slightly. Bellamy asked, "Something wrong?" She stared at the board, at a simple discontinuous function drawn with a thick curve and a dot suspended above. "I've seen this graph 100 times," she whispered. "But today, I felt it." Lucas, already at the door, turned back. He didn't speak. But his eyes, those quiet, steady eyes, softened. That night, Evelyn stayed late in the lecture hall. The only light was from her phone, until she remembered something. She opened her bag. At the bottom, a small candle, one Lucas had left on her desk days ago, unannounced. She lit it. And for the first time, the graph made sense. Not just in her mind, in her breath. You can prove a function, but how do you prove the warmth of a flame? The invitation was unspoken. On Monday morning, Lucas entered the classroom not as a visitor, but as something between myth and student. He didn't ask permission, and no one stopped him. The desks creaked under the weight of heavy textbooks, thick with Greek letters and limits that crawled endlessly toward nowhere. But the boy brought no books, only a candle, short, smooth, and scented faintly of orange rind and clove. Professor Bellamy gestured silently toward the front row. Lucas took his usual spot by the window instead. He opened his palm and placed the candle on the wooden sill, where the light from outside brushed its surface like a whisper. "Today," said Bellamy, "we discuss continuity." Again. The students groaned softly. It had been a week of continuous functions, of epsilon and delta, of proving what could be felt but not always explained. The definitions were clean. Reality wasn't. "What is continuity?" Bellamy asked. Evelyn raised her hand quickly, eager to reclaim authority. "A function f(x) is continuous at a point A if the limit as x approaches A equals fa. We say that the function does not break at that point." Bellamy nodded. "Excellent. Correct." He turned to Lucas. "And what is continuity to you?" Lucas blinked. "It's when something doesn't surprise you." A few students chuckled. Evelyn looked away, offended. Bellamy only smiled. "That might be the best definition I've heard in years." That afternoon, the rain returned. Gray clouds pooled at the edges of the glass like forgotten memories. As Bellamy drew a piecewise function on the board, one that leapt suddenly at x equals 2, Lucas reached into his satchel and pulled out a small lantern. He lit it with a match, shielded it with both hands, and placed it on the desk nearest him. The flame was steady at first. Then came a breeze through the cracked window. The flame bent sideways, flickered, caught itself, and glowed again, slightly shifted. Lucas whispered, almost to himself, "See? It keeps going, even if it stumbles." Bellamy paused in mid-sentence. "What did you say?" Lucas pointed at the lantern. It lost balance for a second, but the warmth didn't leave, so it's still connected. The students looked at the flame. No one wrote anything down. There was nothing to write. Bellamy nodded, then turned to the board and slowly erased the gap in the function. He redrew the curve, not perfect, but whole. "For your assignment," he said, "I want you to try something unusual. Don't prove a function. Feel it. Watch light. Draw how it moves in a room. Where it fails, where it survives. Bring me that." A hand shot up. It was Evelyn, her voice clipped. "With respect, Professor, how does one grade that?" Bellamy looked at her, and for the first time, there was a crack in his voice. "Perhaps we've spent too long grading the wrong things." The next morning, Lucas wasn't at the stairwell. Evelyn noticed first, though she pretended not to. She waited 10 minutes, then 20, fidgeting with the corner of her notebook. Finally, she left the lecture hall and went down the stairs. And there he was. Not absent, just outside. Sitting on the cold stone steps beneath the building, both palms open toward the gray sky. She stood above him, unsure. "Why aren't you inside?" Lucas looked up. "The light's different today." "What light?" He pointed at the sky. "It moves slower when people are quiet." Evelyn almost laughed, but she didn't. Because part of her, the part that had stayed up all night trying to sketch a function that felt like breathing, wanted to understand. That evening, Professor Bellamy sat alone in his office, staring at a drawing. It was a child's scrawl in crayon, a jagged candle flame with dots scattered around it, labeled X1, X2, X3, converging toward a single glowing center. Lucas had left it on his desk without a word. No explanation, no proof, just presence. He turned it over. On the back, in pencil, one line. "Some things burn because they were meant to, not because they were shown how." On Thursday, Bellamy brought a long rectangular mirror to class. He placed a candle at one end and angled the mirror across the room. The reflection of the flame wavered, once, twice, then appeared at the other end. He dimmed the lights. "What do you see?" he asked. "A flame," someone answered. "No," said Lucas, standing up. "You see the path of the flame." Bellamy turned slowly. "Explain." Lucas approached the mirror and held up his hand between the candle and its reflection. The image vanished. "If the path breaks," he said, "the light doesn't reach, even if the flame is still burning." A hush fell. He continued, "I think continuity is like that. Not just about the function itself, but the space between it and the one looking." After class, Evelyn caught up with him. "You made me see something today," she said. Lucas turned, eyebrows raised. "I used to think I had to understand everything, define it, name it. But maybe I just need to stay long enough for the flame to reach me." Lucas smiled, the soft kind of smile that never asks to be noticed. "Then you already understand more than I do," he said. That night, Evelyn wrote in her journal for the first time in years. "Lucas doesn't solve problems. He stands in front of them until they start talking." She paused, then added, "And somehow, that feels like proof." In a different wing of the university, two senior professors discussed the boy over coffee. "It's not proper," said one. "The child disrupts the course structure." "Perhaps," the other replied, "but he disrupts it with something we've forgotten." "What's that?" "Reverence." On Sunday, Lucas helped his mother pour new candles in the back of the shop. She looked at him carefully, her hands gentle but firm. "You've been quiet lately," she said. Lucas nodded. She wiped a streak of wax from his cheek. "Thinking about the university." He hesitated. "They teach in words." "And you?" "I feel in light." She smiled and kissed the top of his head. "Then maybe they need what you carry." On Monday, Lucas walked into the classroom with a taller candle. This one layered in colors, deep violet at the base, pale gold at the top. It flickered as he passed the students. None of them laughed anymore. At the end of the lecture, Bellamy leaned against his desk and looked at the students, not like a teacher, but like a man who had been given a second youth. "There are things," he said softly, "that mathematics cannot prove, but it knows are true." He looked at Lucas. "And fire is one of them." She mastered equations. He held a flame. But when the wind came, only one of them knew which way the graph would bend. Evelyn had never liked things that moved without rules. Wind unsettled her. Music without rhythm made her flinch. Even human emotions, unpredictable and wild, left her exhausted. She loved mathematics because it obeyed. It bowed to reason. If a line curved, there was a reason. If it didn't converge, it could be proven. She had spent her life mastering control. But now, control had a name. Lucas. He never spoke unless asked. And yet when he did, something shifted. The entire class leaned in. Not because he was loud, but because he was quiet in a way that made silence feel full. Evelyn hated how easily he made things beautiful. She had earned her place here. Top of every class, sleepless nights building graphs in her dreams. And then came this boy, with fingers stained in wax and metaphors for proofs, sitting cross-legged by the window, as if mathematics belonged more to him than to her. She did not hate Lucas, but she resented the space he now filled, quietly, lovingly, as though he'd always been there. That week's topic was derivatives. "The derivative," said Professor Bellamy, "is a whisper. It tells us how a function is feeling in a single instant." Lucas raised his hand. The room held its breath. "Then what if the function is tired?" Evelyn rolled her eyes. Bellamy, however, paused, then smiled. Then the derivative will show us its slowing breath. Evelyn clenched her pen tighter. On Wednesday, Professor Bellamy brought in something unusual, a series of tall glass tubes, each filled with air and covered at the top with a sheet of thin paper. "This," he said, "is an exercise in sensitivity." He lit a candle and placed it at the center of the room. The flame stood still, then gently pulsed as the door creaked open and a draft swept across. The paper on one of the tubes fluttered. Bellamy looked at the students. Which tube was closest to the change? Everyone stared. The motion had been nearly invisible. Evelyn guessed wrong. So did the others. Only Lucas remained still. Then he whispered, "The third from the left." Because it bent, not just waved. Bellamy checked. He was right. Evelyn approached Lucas after class for the first time. "How did you know?" Lucas looked at her, not smugly, just openly. "Because I've watched fire move. It doesn't always make noise, but it leaves a memory in the things around it." That night, Evelyn found herself lighting a candle at her desk. A gift from Lucas she had once refused to accept. She watched the flame flicker against the paper she was working on. Partial derivatives, nested functions, second rates of change. But all she could see was the gentle rise and fall of light. For the first time in weeks, she cried. Not because she was sad, but because she realized she had been trying to control something that was never meant to be caged. The next day, Professor Bellamy paired them for a project. "You'll work together," he said. "Create a visual proof of differentiability, not just with graphs, but with experience." Evelyn protested. "He doesn't even know the formal definitions." Bellamy replied, "He knows how functions breathe. You know how they speak. Together, perhaps you'll hear the full sentence." For 2 days, they said almost nothing to each other. Lucas brought candles of varying thickness. Evelyn brought software that simulated changes in slope. They worked side by side, but as if on parallel lines. Until Saturday. They met in a small study room, empty except for a white wall and a fan. Lucas placed 3 candles in a row. He lit each one and turned on the fan. Evelyn frowned. "This isn't rigorous." "Just watch," Lucas said. The flames bent at different angles. He handed her a thin piece of paper. "Draw what you feel, not what you know." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she moved her hand. The curve she drew wasn't smooth. It trembled, had hesitations, asymmetries. And yet, when she stepped back, she saw it. The derivative of a lived moment. That night, Evelyn wrote in her notes, "He draws graphs in the air, and somehow, they hold." She looked at Lucas across the room. He had fallen asleep in the chair, head resting against his wax bag, candlelight warming his face. He looked like something no textbook could hold. On Monday, they presented. Instead of slides, they used silence. Lucas lit a single candle. Evelyn slowly moved a thin sheet of tracing paper above it. The shadow on the wall danced, soft, predictable. Then, as she tilted the paper, the shadow changed, sharper, slower, uncertain. She spoke only once. "This is how the derivative feels when wind approaches." And Lucas added, "You don't always see the change, but you feel its warning." When they finished, no one clapped. Not because it wasn't brilliant, but because it didn't need applause. It needed breath. After class, Evelyn turned to Lucas. You made me draw with feeling. Lucas smiled. You made me listen with structure. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. Two lines had finally touched, tangent at a single point, and for that moment, they were one. He didn't find the limit in a textbook. He found it in how a drop of wax pauses, just before becoming part of the water. Lucas had begun a new experiment. Each morning, after helping his mother pour candles in their tiny kitchen, he would take a small bowl of cold water and a pot of melted wax. He'd sit by the window, bare feet folded underneath him, and with the tip of a spoon, he would let one single drop of wax fall. He watched. The drop did not fall straight. It hesitated, elongated midair, quivered, then landed with a soundless kiss on the surface where it became a shape. A small, trembling dome. Then another drop, and another. Each drop fell closer to the last. Lucas's breath stayed soft, almost prayerful, and after the 10th drop, he leaned back and whispered, "The drop never really touches the one before it, but it remembers where the last one fell." His mother didn't understand what he was doing, but she trusted the quiet rhythm in him. In class that week, Bellamy opened with a challenge. Everyone talks about limits, but I want to ask you, what does it mean for something to approach a point but never reach it? How can we call that understanding? Evelyn raised her hand. Because we can quantify how close it gets. The value exists, even if the exact moment doesn't. Lucas looked down at his candle, then said softly, "But isn't that just guessing with more decimals?" Bellamy turned, smiling. "Explain, Lucas." Lucas took a deep breath. "This morning I dropped wax into water, one drop at a time. The first ones landed far apart. But the more I dropped, the closer they got. Still, they never touched." He looked up. "But I could tell where the next one wanted to go. It's like the drops had a habit, a direction, even if they never landed in the same place." Evelyn frowned, but she didn't argue. Not this time. Lucas continued, eyes distant, as if reading something none of them could see. "A limit isn't where something lands. It's the rhythm it learns as it moves." That sentence stayed with Bellamy for days. He wrote it down on the blackboard in his office. Then he stared at it. Not because it was incorrect, but because it was too right. He had spent years teaching the epsilon-delta definition of a limit. He had seen students memorize it, prove it, repeat it like a sacred chant. But none had ever described it with such quiet finality. Rhythm, not arrival. That was new. That was dangerous. The next day, Lucas brought his bowl of water to class. "I want to show you," he said, "how the wax lands." Students gathered around. Evelyn stayed back, arms crossed, skeptical, but curious. Lucas lit a tea candle under a spoon of wax, waited for it to melt, then dropped a bead into the bowl. The surface rippled. The wax curled and hardened. Then he dropped another, closer, and another. The class watched, breathing slower. When the 10th drop fell, the wax had formed a path, curved, imperfect, but clearly heading toward something. Lucas whispered, "That's what a function does when it nears a limit. It listens to where it's been." A guest was visiting that day. Dr. Kessler, a stern, sharply dressed mathematician from MIT. He had come to observe Bellamy's unusual class, having heard rumors of the boy with the candles. Dr. Kessler watched the demonstration in silence. Then he cleared his throat. "Well," he said dryly, "that's a sweet analogy, but ultimately meaningless. Mathematics doesn't care about poetry. A limit is a limit because we can prove it. Lucas looked up, not frightened, just puzzled. He asked, "But who decided proof was the only kind of knowing?" The class went still. Dr. Kessler chuckled. "Child, do you think your candles offer more than centuries of formal rigor?" Lucas didn't flinch. He picked up a piece of hardened wax and placed it gently in Kessler's hand. "No, sir," he said. "But they're warm." That night, Evelyn found herself walking to the south side for the first time. Lucas's mother welcomed her into their narrow apartment with the smell of honey and orange peels. The walls were lined with candles in all stages of drying. On the small table sat the bowl Lucas had used in class, now empty. Evelyn looked around. "Does he always talk like that?" His mother smiled. "Lucas doesn't talk much, but when he does, he's usually talking to more than just people." Evelyn hesitated. "I don't understand him." "I know," the woman said gently. "Neither do I. But I've learned not to stop him." The next lecture, Bellamy erased the entire board and wrote only one sentence. "A limit is not the point. It is the listening." Then he turned to the class. "What does it mean," he asked, "to define something that never arrives?" One student raised his hand. "It means we trust the direction." "Good," Bellamy nodded. "Now, what does it mean, humanly?" Lucas raised his hand. "It means we stay." Evelyn looked over. Their eyes met. And in that single look, she understood what she had refused to see before. Lucas was not simplifying math. He was returning it to something alive. That weekend, Lucas and Evelyn sat together in the library for the first time. She pulled out her notes on L'Hôpital's rule. He brought a candle carved with spirals. They spoke of tangents, of infinitesimals, of the impossibility of touching a point that slips away forever. And then Evelyn said, Maybe we define limits because we're afraid of letting things go undefined." Lucas nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why we need candles," he said. "They end, but never abruptly. They teach us how to leave light behind." At the end of the month, Bellamy gave a lecture to the entire department. He began with no preamble, no theorem, just one sentence. "Mathematics is not the pursuit of truth. It is the pursuit of listening without needing a rival." Some clapped, some frowned, some dismissed him. But in the back of the hall, a boy with a candle smiled softly, and the flame bent toward him, as if it too understood. Everyone else saw a flickering candle. Only he saw a function made of light. Lucas didn't speak much that week, but he had been working. In the back room of the candle shop, behind racks of cooling beeswax and wicks hung like laundry, Lucas had built something new. He called it the log candle, though it looked nothing like a log. It was tall and thin, with a spiral carved along its side, a spiral that grew narrower the higher it climbed. The wax was dyed in fading shades of amber and blue, like night slowly becoming dawn. When it burned, the wax didn't drip evenly. Instead, it followed the spiral path, curling downward in diminishing arcs. Slower and slower, each drop taking longer than the last, as if the candle were slowing time. Lucas watched it for hours. He was trying to see a function. On Monday, he brought it to class. The room was already full when he arrived late. Students murmured as he carried the strange, slender candle to the front and placed it on the central table. No one asked what it was. Bellamy didn't interrupt. Lucas lit the wick. Then he stepped back and whispered, "Watch." For the first few minutes, nothing seemed unusual. The flame danced gently, and wax began to soften. Then came the first drop. Not straight down, but along the carved spiral, sliding sideways before falling. Then another, and another. Each drop came slower than the one before. Evelyn leaned forward. "That's a logarithmic decay," she said, half to herself. "The intervals between drops, they're increasing logarithmically." Bellamy turned to Lucas. "Did you build this deliberately?" Lucas shrugged. "I just followed how wax wanted to fall." For the next 30 minutes, the class watched in silence as the wax slowed. Lucas stood near the window, hands behind his back. Bellamy didn't lecture. Evelyn didn't take notes. They watched the spiral as it faded into stillness, not with finality, but with grace. After class, Evelyn lingered. Her voice was softer than usual. "I didn't know that you could see functions with your eyes." Lucas turned to her. "You can't always. But sometimes, the world writes one anyway." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed with the lights off, remembering the candle, the spiral, the slowing rhythm. It wasn't just a model, it was a feeling, a kind of farewell in motion. She sat up, lit a candle of her own, and watched the way the light stretched across her desk. Then she took out a pencil and drew the wax's fall. Not the math, not the equation, but the feeling of it. Curved lines, fading arcs, and in the center, a hollow. Not emptiness, but silence. The next day, Professor Bellamy called it an intuitive function. He placed the log candle on a high shelf in the lecture hall. "This," he said, "is not just an object. It's a conversation. One between matter and time, shape and surrender." Dr. Kessler, who had returned out of curiosity, scoffed in the back. "Are we now teaching metaphysics?" he asked. Bellamy turned. "Only if your equations have never wept." That same afternoon, Evelyn asked Lucas if she could walk with him after class. They wandered the edge of the campus, passing under bare trees and dim street lamps. "How do you see functions in things?" she asked. Lucas tilted his head. "I don't see them. I feel when something repeats, not just in space, but in what it wants to do. Like the wax. It wanted to slow down. So I followed that." Evelyn stopped walking. She stared at him. "You talk like it's alive." Lucas smiled. "Isn't it?" They passed a bench where a homeless man sat huddled in blankets. His breath made small clouds. Evelyn gave him the orange she had in her bag. Lucas lit a tiny tea light and left it on the edge of the bench, where it glowed faintly in the cold. No words, just light. The next class was quiet. Bellamy wrote no equations. Instead, he asked, "What is the shape of grief?" No one answered. He nodded. "Good. Then we're ready to talk about concavity." Lucas brought a new drawing, not on graph paper, but on wax. He had melted and pressed wax into a flat circle and carved a curve into it with a toothpick. It looked like a parabola, but asymmetrical. The left side rose sharply. The right curved slowly, like breath returning after a long pause. He held it up to the window light. "This," he said, "is what it looks like when something breaks and tries to come back." Evelyn cried quietly. No one noticed at first, but when the candlelight reflected off her tears, the class understood. Not everything in mathematics is about knowing. Some things are about naming the ache. That evening, Bellamy walked alone. He thought of all the years he had taught proofs, integrals, limits, clean, sharp, brilliant ideas, but none had ever burned into him like this. He returned to his office and wrote on a scrap of paper, "Let the candle teach. Let the wax fall on its own time. Let the graph draw itself in flame." Then he placed it in his desk drawer, beside his retirement papers. On Friday, Evelyn came to class holding something. Her own candle. It was plain, but carefully made. No spiral, no scent. Just smooth white wax. She walked to Lucas and handed it to him. "I don't know what this one says yet," she said. Lucas held it to the light. "It says you're listening." That day, no theorems were written. No homework was assigned. Bellamy looked at the board, then at his students, then at the candle shelf, and said only this: "You've all learned what a function is. Now, go find one no one's written yet." He pointed at a missing point on the graph, and asked the one question math had no proof for: "What do we do with the places that don't exist?" Lucas sat in the back of the classroom, tracing a line in the condensation on the window. It was raining again, the kind of rain that made everything blur slightly, like a memory trying to return. Bellamy had begun the lecture in his usual calm voice. "Today, we discuss removable discontinuities." He drew a graph. Clean. Familiar. A single gap. A hole where a point should have been. "This," he said, circling the gap, "is a place the function does not exist. But we can redefine it. We can assign it a value. Smooth it over." He paused. "And then, it behaves." Lucas raised his hand. "What if it doesn't want to behave?" Bellamy smiled gently. "Then we ask it why." Later that day, Lucas stayed after class. The room was quiet. The chalk dust in the air looked like snow, suspended. He walked up to the board, stared at the gap in the function, then turned to Bellamy. "If something's missing, does it mean we failed to name it? Or that it never wanted to be named?" Bellamy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat down, slowly, as if his body were listening to the question too. "I think," he said at last, "sometimes we don't define things because they're not ready to be held yet, and sometimes because we're not ready to hold them." The next day, Lucas brought a new kind of chart to class. But it wasn't made of ink. It was wax. He had melted a thin slab of ivory-colored candle, poured it onto glass, then scratched a graph into it with a nail. The curve moved gracefully, then skipped a space. A small hole. Deliberate. "I left this one out," he said quietly, holding it up. "Because not everything missing is a mistake." He set it down, then lit a tiny taper candle and let the wax drip, slowly, into the hole. It filled. Not perfectly, but softly. Lucas looked up. "I think love works like that." The class was silent. Then Evelyn whispered, "You mean, sometimes what's missing doesn't need fixing? Just kindness." Lucas nodded. Bellamy sat still behind his desk, his eyes blinking slower than usual. He had spent 40 years teaching students to close gaps, and today a boy had asked him to leave one open and listen to it. That night, Lucas sat by the candle stall with his mother, tying wicks in quiet rhythm. She watched him for a long while, then asked, "You've been quieter than usual." "I'm trying to understand," Lucas said. "Understand what?" He paused. "If I don't define something, does it still matter?" His mother looked at him gently. Some people never get defined by the world, Lucas. But they still light up a room. That's how I know they matter. He didn't answer, but he tied the next wick slower. At the end of the week, Bellamy announced the theme of the upcoming student seminar. What is a function missing? Lucas didn't sign up to speak, but he came, sat in the very back, candle on his lap. Evelyn took the podium with her usual poise. But this time, she wasn't presenting equations. She projected an image, a child's drawing, uneven, wild, of a graph. Crayons, 1 point missing, a small heart sketched in the gap. She said only this: "We talk about continuity like it's about curves and numbers, but sometimes what's missing tells the most truth. And sometimes it's where something kind can begin." There was no applause, just breath, and a flame in the back row that glowed slightly brighter. After the talk, a student named James approached Lucas. "I never liked math," he said awkwardly. "It always made me feel not enough." Lucas handed him a small candle, unlit. James asked, "What is it?" "A start," Lucas replied. That evening, Lucas went to Bellamy's office. The professor looked up, surprised. Lucas carried something wrapped in linen. He unwrapped it slowly. A new wax graph. But this time, the gap wasn't filled. Instead, it was circled. Etched in tiny letters beside it were 4 words. Not broken, just waiting. Bellamy looked at it for a long time. Then he placed it on the windowsill. The following Monday, Lucas arrived early. He drew a new graph on the blackboard before class began. A messy, asymmetric function with multiple missing points. When the students walked in, they stared. Then Lucas handed out small wax beads. He pointed to the gaps. "You don't have to solve these," he said, "but maybe you can sit with them. Just for a little while." One by one, the students placed their beads in the chalk-drawn gaps. And for the first time in the university's history, the graph wasn't completed. It was honored. That night, Bellamy wrote in his private notebook, "Mathematics taught me how to prove. Lucas taught me how to stay with what I couldn't. I now believe, beneath every graph is a question, and beneath every question is a heart." The rumors spread like all quiet things do. Slow at first, then suddenly everywhere. At first it was just whispers among the faculty. A boy selling handmade candles who could explain functions better than textbooks. Then a graduate student visiting from MIT brought the story home. "There's a child at the University of Chicago who doesn't take notes, doesn't use definitions, but can make a room fall silent with one sentence about a missing point on a graph." 2 weeks later, they arrived. 3 guests sat quietly in the back row of Bellamy's class. One from Harvard, one from MIT, and one from Caltech, a specialist in topological spaces. They didn't speak. They didn't introduce themselves. They just listened. Lucas, sitting by the window, didn't seem to notice. He lit a candle, as always, and let the scent of honey and ash drift quietly between the rows of puzzled students. That day's lecture was on connectedness. Bellamy drew a curve with a hole in it and said, "If a space has a missing part, but any 2 points can still reach each other without falling into that gap, we call it connected." Lucas looked up and asked, "What if the human heart has a hole in it, but can still love?" No one laughed. No one answered. Because they all felt it. The lesson had left the blackboard. It was now inside the room. After class, Evelyn approached Lucas, notebook in hand. "Those people," she whispered. "They're not students. Who are they?" Lucas was coiling new wick between his fingers. "They're looking for something," he said. "What?" Lucas looked out the window. A word they haven't found a name for yet. The next day, the visiting professors returned, but this time they asked for a private session. Not with Bellamy, with Lucas. Bellamy looked uneasy. Lucas just smiled. They met in a small side room, lit by 10 candles Lucas had prepared in advance. No slides, no projectors, just wax, wire, and light. Lucas opened a weathered wooden box and placed it on the table. Inside were wax structures shaped into curves, spirals, and incomplete loops. Bits of string connected points across melted surfaces. Beads of light danced across translucent sheets. The professors leaned in. "This model," one of them asked, "what do you call it?" Lucas didn't speak immediately. Then, softly, "I haven't named it." "Why not?" He looked at them calmly. "Because I haven't understood it enough." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. The topologist, an older woman with silver hair and a voice like winter paper, leaned forward. "You're creating a kind of geometry I haven't seen," she said. "It's not spatial, not abstract. It's alive. It bends when we do." Lucas nodded. "Like the human heart," he said. "When it's still, it curves one way. When it's in pain, it reshapes itself." Evelyn watched from the corner. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Today wasn't a day for Lucas to learn from professors. It was a day for professors to learn from Lucas. That night, Lucas didn't go straight home. He walked through South Chicago's narrow streets, past broken lamps and chalk games drawn on concrete. He stopped when he saw a young boy drawing on the sidewalk with a burnt stick. "What are you drawing?" Lucas asked. The boy looked up. "A bridge, but I don't know where it goes yet." Lucas knelt beside him. "That's okay," he said, "as long as it bends enough not to break." The boy laughed and handed him the stick. Lucas, for the first time, drew a function. Not with chalk, not with wax, but with ash, on the skin of the earth. The next day, after the visiting professors left, the topologist returned to Bellamy's office. She stood in the doorway and said, "You realize, don't you? That boy doesn't need formulas. He feels functions as if they're breathing." Bellamy looked out the window. Lucas was helping Evelyn sort candles, quietly humming. He nodded. "And that," he said, "took me 30 years to remember." Later that week, a student tried to publish Lucas's wax model under the title, "The Lucas Spiral Method." When they brought the paper to Lucas and asked him to sign it, he crossed the title out with a pencil. Then, in tiny letters, he wrote, "Still listening." That evening, Bellamy opened the old notebook he once filled with theorems and citations. He turned to the last blank page and wrote, "If there is a guide, we do not need his name, only the light he brings." The rain came early that morning, soft but steady, like a curtain being drawn across a stage. Professor Bellamy arrived 10 minutes late, an umbrella dripping in his hand and a half-written lecture in his coat pocket. When he stepped into the classroom, the first thing he noticed was not the silence, but the flame. A single candle burned in Lucas's usual spot by the window. But the boy was gone. No satchel, no wax, no barefoot steps echoing on the floor. Only a sheet of paper beneath the candle, slightly damp, edges curling. Evelyn reached it first. On it were numbers, a sequence, incomplete. 314, 1.73, 2.71. Then nothing. Just an unfinished breath. No one spoke. Bellamy sat down at the desk and stared at the flame. It flickered softly, as if unsure whether to stay lit without the boy who had once protected every gust of air. After 5 minutes, he folded the sheet of paper, pressed it between the pages of his notebook, and said, "There will be no lecture today." That night, Evelyn walked the streets near the candle shop. The windows were dark, no scent of wax, no whisper of boiling water. She knocked once, twice, no answer. She stood in the rain for a long time, holding a candle she had made for him. Plain, undecorated, but warm in her hands. She left it on the doorstep and walked away. 3 days passed, then a week. Rumors stirred. Maybe he left town. Maybe the school told him to go. Maybe he was never really here. Evelyn refused to believe any of it, because the numbers were real, and the warmth they left behind still lingered. Bellamy tried to resume teaching. He returned to definitions, proofs, and theorems. The chalk moved on the board again. But something had changed. One morning, in the middle of a lecture on uniform convergence, he paused. A student asked, "Professor?" Bellamy looked at the symbol he had just written. It was flawless, but it was empty. He turned back to the class. "We are no longer studying mathematics," he said quietly. "We are trying to hear what the world is whispering." Evelyn took it hardest. She began collecting every scrap of wax Lucas had left behind. She melted them down into one candle, tall, strange, uneven in texture. She called it the ghost function, and each night she lit it without saying a word. One night she tried to finish the sequence. She added 1.41. But when she looked again, the candle had split, right down the middle. She never tried to finish it again. In the 3rd week of his absence, Bellamy gathered the class without notice. No whiteboard, no syllabus. He asked them each to bring one object that reminded them of Lucas. One student brought a spiral of twine. Another, a tear-shaped bead of hardened wax. Evelyn brought silence. They placed the objects in a circle. No names, no explanations. Then Bellamy lit a candle in the center and said, "This is not grief. This is remembering." That night, Bellamy opened his drawer and took out the retirement papers he had filled out months ago. He tore them in half, then lit one of Lucas's leftover candles. He watched the flame dance, and in its movement he thought, "I used to teach math so students could become professors. Now I teach math because I want them to become still enough to listen." And slowly something changed in the room where Lucas once sat. It was no longer a place of equations. It became a place of pause, of breath, of honoring what could not be proven, but could be felt. In time, Bellamy began writing again, but this time not a research paper, a book. He called it The Continuous Sense, What a Candle Taught Me About Functions. And in the dedication, he wrote, "For the boy who never asked for proof, only permission to wonder." No one knew where Lucas had gone, but Evelyn sometimes swore she felt him near, in the sway of a curtain, the shift of shadow on a graph, the softness in a point that once seemed harsh. And whenever someone asked her, "Do you think he'll come back?" she answered quietly, "He never left." Because some lights don't go out. They just wait for the wind to return. The classroom had learned to live without him. 3 weeks had passed since Lucas disappeared. Yet his candle still stood on the windowsill, and no one dared remove it. The flame had gone out, but its absence burned louder than fire. Bellamy lectured with less precision, more pause. Evelyn no longer sat in the 2nd row. She now sat where Lucas once had, not to replace him, but to keep that space breathing. Then, on a Monday morning brushed with sunlight and silence, the door opened, and he walked in. No one moved. Lucas stepped quietly to the back of the room, placed something on Bellamy's desk, a folded paper sealed with wax, then returned to the window seat as if he'd never left. Bellamy stood frozen for several seconds. Then he opened the paper. Inside was the same unfinished sequence, but one more number had been added. 0.99. Not 1. Not exactly. Just near. Beneath it, Lucas had written a single sentence. That's what I heard when the wind passed through. Bellamy said nothing. Instead, he erased the board, wiped clean 3 weeks of forgotten logic, and wrote in chalk, 0.99 equals 1. A few students chuckled, others groaned. They'd seen the argument before, a trick, some said, a paradox, others insisted. But this time Bellamy didn't offer proofs. No algebraic manipulations, no limits. He turned to Lucas. Would you explain it? Lucas shook his head. I can't. Evelyn asked gently, but you wrote it. Lucas looked at her. I didn't write it. I heard it. Silence. Then Evelyn whispered, You mean some truths arrive without asking permission? Lucas nodded. They don't come to be proven. They come to be held. That afternoon, Bellamy closed his office early and walked to the university bookstore. He purchased a blank journal, leather-bound, no lines, just pages waiting for thought. He wrote on the first page, Not every number needs to be chased. Some come closer by standing still. Then, in the corner, he drew a candle. Just the outline. Unlit. Word of Lucas's return spread quickly. But when a visiting researcher from Princeton asked to meet him, Lucas refused. I don't have anything to teach, he said. Evelyn, standing nearby, smiled. That's the only kind of teacher worth learning from. One day later, Lucas walked into Bellamy's office unannounced. He carried a small box. Inside was the first candle he had ever made, misshapen, rough, scented faintly with something uncertain, like smoke and pine. He placed it in front of Bellamy. I want you to have it, he said. Bellamy's hands trembled slightly. He reached for it like one reaches for memory. Why now? He asked. Lucas looked out the window. Because I think every function has a place to glow. The next morning, Bellamy didn't come to class. Instead, Evelyn found a note on the blackboard. Class is canceled today. Go listen to the wind. They did. Some sat on the grass outside, notebooks closed. Others wandered alone. Evelyn stood under the tree near the south side fence, the place where Lucas once showed her how light curves when it meets water. She closed her eyes and heard something not quite sound, but near. Weeks passed. Lucas spoke little, but he had begun drawing again. Not graphs, but something else. Curves made of ash and wax. Letters that dissolved into spirals. Evelyn called them echoes. He just called them leftovers. One day she asked him, What made you come back? Lucas hesitated, then said, I thought the sequence wasn't finished, but I realized maybe it never is. Maybe we only stop when we stop listening. Later that month, Bellamy gave his final lecture. He stood at the front of the room, older now but softer, and said, I once believed math was about answers, about ending questions with certainty, but I was wrong. He looked toward Lucas. I now believe math is a language for what the heart cannot say, and sometimes does not need to. Then, for the first time in his long career, he stepped away from the podium. and gave it to a boy who didn't speak in proofs, but in pauses and fire. It started with a bench. Just an old wooden bench someone left behind near the edge of South Side Chicago, under the shadow of a half-finished bridge. Lucas found it one afternoon while walking with a candle in his coat pocket. He sat, watched the breeze move through a gap in the fence, and imagined a line, not drawn with chalk, not measured in units, but made from warmth, from breath, from the way silence paused between two children playing in the dirt. That was the first day of the class. There were no students yet. But Lucas already knew. It would begin here. Weeks passed. Children came. Not all at once, but in pairs, in curiosity. One girl with grass-stained knees, a boy with no shoes, another who refused to speak. Lucas didn't ask their names. He asked what they'd seen that day. A bird that flew crooked, a raindrop that left two trails, a window that never fogged on the left side. He nodded at each answer, then handed them candles, and said, "Let's draw that." The classroom had no roof, only sky, no walls, only wind, and no blackboard. Just earth, wax, and a belief that if a question is good enough, the answer can wait. Word spread. A few volunteers from the university came by, unsure at first, but soon enchanted. Evelyn arrived with graph paper and left with her shoes off. She returned every Saturday, to light candles, to listen, to learn again, from the beginning. One day, Bellamy appeared. His hair whiter now, his gait slower, but his eyes, they burned even brighter. He stood at the edge, watched a child hold up a melted candle and say, "This one curves when I breathe." Bellamy sat down beside Lucas. "I didn't bring anything," he said. Lucas passed him a taper and a match. "You brought your breath," he replied. "That's enough." That evening, the sky turned gold. Lucas gathered the children and asked them to draw one function, just one, using anything but numbers. Some used wax, some used string. One boy used silence, tracing with his finger through the dust. When they finished, no one explained. Lucas looked at the spirals, the arcs, the broken lines that mended themselves halfway through. He said, "Every function has a place it wants to go. But it doesn't have to rush. It just needs someone to walk with it." Later that week, Evelyn brought a reporter, reluctantly. He had heard about the barefoot function boy and wanted a quote. Lucas simply said, "I'm not teaching math. I'm helping them remember what they already knew before anyone told them they weren't good enough." The reporter didn't write that down, but the children remembered. The school grew. No building ever rose, but benches multiplied. Candles bloomed like flowers, not for prayer, not for power, but for presence. Each child made one. Each child gave one away. And one afternoon, a girl no older than 6, with a red ribbon in her hair and a notebook too large for her hands, tugged at Lucas's sleeve. "Teacher?" she asked. He turned. "If I'm not good at math, can I still draw a function?" Lucas smiled, knelt beside her, and said, "If you're asking that, you've already begun." That night, the wind returned. It passed through the candlelight and didn't blow anything out, because now the light was everywhere. And no one needed a blackboard to see it. Sometimes, a story begins not with a question, but with a silence. Lucas was born from such a silence. He is not real in the way textbooks require, but he is real in the way we remember warmth or the shape of a voice that once called us by name. This story is for anyone who ever felt too quiet to raise their hand, too slow to catch up, too strange to belong. I wrote it for you, and maybe, a little, for myself. Because I believe that not all learning happens on a blackboard. Some happens between people, in a pause, in a candle, in a breath. If you found light in these pages, carry it forward. Quietly is fine. Gently is enough. It was never meant to blind, only to warm. The author.